Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the frozen white silence of the far north, where your breath fogs instantly, the wind chatters through sealskin, and the snow is so bright it could blind you by noon. You're bundled in layers that itch, pull, and smell faintly of old fish, and even then you're not warm. Not really. The cold here doesn't bother with your outer coat. It seeps into your bones like an old song hummed too many times. You squint into the endless Arctic morning where everything, absolutely everything, is blinding white. The ice stretches to the edges of your sight. The snowdrifts shine like polished steel, and somewhere in the distance, the sun hovers low on the horizon, smirking. You're about to find out the hard way that winter sunlight on a snowfield is not your friend. It's like staring into a fluorescent light bulb with your eyeballs peeled. Oh, and by the way, you probably won't survive this, not without some help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Drop that in the comments if you're awake enough. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The snow crunches beneath your mukluks. A wind lashes across your face, pulling at your hood, curling around the nape of your neck. You duck instinctively. The land here, flat, treeless, eerily bright, has no shadows to hide in, no cover from the sky's blazing white. The light doesn't come from above. It bounces. Off the ice, the snow, even your own shadow. It reflects until there's no real up or down. It just is. And here's where you begin to understand why the Inuit, who have lived on this land for thousands of years, invented something so perfectly, simply brilliant that it's almost comical how long it took the rest of the world to catch up. The earliest Arctic eyewear isn't made of glass. It isn't even translucent. It's carved, often from whalebone, driftwood, or caribou antler. A single strip, shaped to fit across the face, with horizontal slits so narrow they'd make a Venetian blind jealous. You might think, wait, how can you see through that? But you slide them on and suddenly, relief. The brightness dulls, the shimmer fades, and the world regains its edges. You've just met the ancestor of modern sunglasses. Snow blindness isn't just a nuisance, it's essentially a sunburn on your eyeballs. Not kidding. The medical term is photokeratitis, and it feels exactly as awful as it sounds. But the Inuit had this licked ages ago. Long before UV ratings and mirrored lenses, they understood that vision in a blizzard was a matter of life and death. The solution wasn't fancy. It was a piece of whale rib or antler, whittled flat, polished smooth, and slit just enough to narrow the flood of light into something manageable. Historians still argue whether the slitted design came purely from practical experimentation or whether there was a bit of mysticism involved. Some believe the narrow openings were inspired by eye shapes seen in animal spirits, sleek, sharp, and otherworldly. Others point to early masks found in digs near Thule sites, suggesting ceremonial overlaps between vision and the unseen. Meanwhile, your own vision is starting to sharpen beneath the carved frame. The snow doesn't look so hostile anymore. It's still bright, sure, but manageable. You notice more detail now, the wind-etched lines on the ground, the faint indentations where a fox passed earlier that morning, the way the ice crystals catch the light in spirals. You walk forward, breathing a little easier. Behind you, a low, rounded igloo squats in the snow. Smoke curls from its top vent, and your footsteps lead away from it like tiny commas. There's no path ahead, exactly. But you follow the snow's texture, reading it like a map, just like they did for generations. There's something absurdly peaceful about walking in this silence, with your field of vision framed by slits of bone. It feels deliberate, like the world has been edited to only show you what matters. Just a little detail here, a flicker of movement there. You find yourself blinking less, squinting less, thinking less. The funny thing, you feel a little cool, a little futuristic even. These ancient bone visors look sleek, like something a minimalist design studio might try to reboot on Kickstarter. Eco-chic Arctic eyewear, they'd call it. But you're wearing the real thing, and the difference is, these aren't a fashion statement. They're survival. But there is an elegance to them, a kind of slow, functional grace. You press your gloved fingers to the carved whalebone, feeling the gentle dip where the eye slits have been sanded smooth. They're warm from your breath, faintly damp, and oddly comforting. In the distance, a pair of sled dogs begins to bark. Not frantic, just alert. There's movement out on the ice. Nothing urgent, maybe just a seal surfacing in a distant lead. You pause, visor in place, scanning the horizon. And now you begin to notice how the sun never really rises here, not like you expect it to. It just slides around, low and constant, skimming the sky. The light never feels warm. It only glows with a kind of icy authority, demanding respect. And you give it that quietly as you keep walking. The wind softens a little, your breath puffs out in mist. Somewhere inside your hood, your cheeks are tingling with cold, but your eyes feel safe, protected, narrowed, and focused. Like a hunter, like someone who belongs here. You pause at a rise in the snow, barely a slope really, but enough to give you a slight vantage. Through your slitted visor, the endless white begins to offer up stories. Tracks, ridges, ripples left by the wind. It's not blank anymore. It never was. You just had to learn how to see it. You remember what the elder said earlier, as he handed you the sunglasses. Don't just look at the snow. Let the snow look back. Which, at the time, sounded poetic and a bit alarming, but now it sort of makes sense. There's a difference between seeing and looking. You walk a little farther, the whalebone frame snug against your face, and you start to imagine the very first time these were used. There's no date carved in stone. No surviving pair mounted in a neat glass museum box labeled Original Sunglasses 3200 BCE. But archaeologists agree that the Inuit and their ancestors were wearing snow goggles long before the rest of the world even realized eyeballs could sunburn. They found examples along the northern coasts of Alaska and Canada, Yupik, Inupiat, Chukchi, Inuit communities, all carving their own variations. Some out of driftwood, others from the jawbones of animals. A few even had etched designs, little carved whorls and dots along the rim, perhaps to mark ownership, perhaps just to pass the time. Historians still argue whether those decorations had spiritual meaning or were simply early expressions of personal flair. Either way, the idea was always the same: protect the eyes, and not just from the light, from wind, from glare, from fatigue. Imagine spending 8 hours on a hunt across a snowfield with no sunglasses. By noon, you wouldn't be able to tell a shadow from a snowdrift. But with the visor, your field of vision narrows, yes, but your focus sharpens. Your brain relaxes. Some modern optical engineers have even theorized that the slit design improves visual acuity by mimicking the way a pinhole camera works, constricting the range of light to improve clarity. Not bad for something made without lasers or lab coats. You glance over to your left and spot a low cairn, just a pile of carefully stacked stones, an inuksuk. It marks something. A trail, a food cache, a warning, maybe even a memorial. You trudge closer and run your hand along the stone, its edges softened by frost and time. Even this, somehow, looks clearer through your eyewear. Not just because the sun is blunted, but because you're seeing in a new way. A way shaped by centuries of survival. You stop to rest. Your body is warm from walking, but the wind insists on brushing against your skin wherever it finds a gap. You hunker down behind the cairn, back to the breeze, and carefully lift the sunglasses from your face. The world goes instantly white-hot, as if someone just flicked on the stadium lights. You wince, blink rapidly, and jam the visor back down. Lesson learned. You think about what your own ancestors might have used, squinting in other climates. Maybe a wide-brimmed hat, maybe just a hand raised to the forehead, but none of them lived in a world made entirely of mirrored light. Some old journals from Arctic explorers tell hilarious and horrifying tales of their first winter journeys. British sailors, outfitted in heavy wool and brass buttons, trudging off into the brightness like overdressed tourists. They called the snow the Great Devourer of Sight. One of them, a lieutenant from the Franklin expedition, reportedly tried to make his own snow goggles out of tinted glass and pine tar. It shattered on day 2. Meanwhile, you imagine an Inuit hunter glancing over at him, completely unimpressed, slipping on his whalebone visor with the ease of tying a shoelace. There's a quiet kind of intelligence in that contrast, not the flashy, patent-pending kind, the lived-in kind. Trial, error, repeat, generations of knowledge passed down not by textbooks, but by watching, carving, trying again. You picture a child learning to sand bones smooth with sealskin, a teenager measuring the width of the slits by the thickness of his own thumb. No need for measurements or blueprints, just feel. Just practice, just survival. The snow crunches behind you, and you turn to see a sled approaching, a small team of dogs pulling a long, narrow kamutik. The driver, bundled, weathered, expression unreadable, lifts a hand in greeting. You raise yours back. He nods at your visor, then at his own. You both understand. There's no conversation needed. He pulls up beside you and tosses you a strip of dried fish. You catch it, teeth chattering thanks. He chuckles and points to the sun, still low, still blinding. Worse tomorrow, he says, then clicks his tongue at the dogs and heads off again. You chew the fish. It's salty, leathery, and tough, but nourishing. As it softens in your mouth, you think about how many layers of invention are needed to live here. Eyewear, tools, preservation techniques, even the timing of a journey. Everything shaped by the snow, the light, the cold. And somehow, a strip of whalebone carved just so is part of the reason you're able to see it all. You sit beside the stone cairn for a while, visor on, the wind pressing steadily against your back like a sleepy but persistent dog. The snowfield ahead has no color, really, just variations of white, cream, and faint blue. But with your slit sunglasses on, it's like watching the world through a painter's careful brush. And in your gloved hand, you're turning over a scrap of whalebone, smooth, slightly curved, heavy with history. You're going to try it for yourself. You fish out your bone-carving knife, more like a thin sliver of honed iron lashed to a wooden handle, and settle it against the surface. The first scrape is unsteady. Not bad, though. You adjust your grip. Another pass. The groove deepens. This is how the earliest ones did it, carving by firelight or in the lee of a windbreak, hunched over a piece of driftwood or bone, shaping their eye shields not by measuring tape, but by instinct. Historians still argue whether these goggles were carved to fit each individual or made to be handed down generationally, adjusted as needed. But what's clear is this: they weren't ornamental, at least not originally. They were practical, and their practicality was deadly serious. Inuit carvers knew which materials would hold up to sub-zero conditions. Whalebone was prized, not just for its strength, but for its subtle pliability when warm. A carver would soak it, sometimes briefly steam it over a blubber lamp, then shape it across a curved wooden form. You try to imagine this step, the steam curling up, the faint smell of fat and salt, the slow, careful bending. Not too fast, or the bone would crack. Too slow, and it would warp. The slits came last. Not too wide, or you'd let in glare. Not too narrow, or you'd lose all vision. The sweet spot was often the width of a slender blade of grass, though of course no grass grew here. They must have measured with something else, perhaps sinew, perhaps a memory. Your knife slips slightly, scratching a line you didn't intend. You curse softly under your breath, but catch yourself. You're a guest here, not a master. These goggles were not just utility, they were legacy. The people who made them also wore them while sealing, navigating by star, or guiding their children through drifted trails. As you scrape at the surface, you remember a story told by a hunter earlier in the season. He said that once, a man who forgot his goggles on a long spring hunt went blind within hours. Snow blindness isn't permanent, usually, but this time, the man's eyes swelled shut for 3 days. He had to be guided back to camp by his dogs. For the rest of his life, he carved his visors with a little dot between the slits, a personal reminder. Never again. You angle your visor slightly and glance upward. The sun, that sly Arctic intruder, hasn't moved much. It never does this time of year. It just meanders slowly, like a seal in a tide pool watching. You look back down at your attempt. It's crude. The lines are uneven. But the idea is there. A long piece of rib bone, 2 narrow slits, and a gentle curve. You hold it up to your eyes and peer through. The effect is weirdly soothing. The world is sliced, framed, manageable. You think about how this all started. Not today, centuries ago. The earliest known snow goggles date back thousands of years, and they weren't all made the same way. Some had just a single horizontal slit, others 2 narrow vertical cuts. There are even examples with tiny pinholes, like inverted telescope lenses. Historians still argue whether the pinhole version came before or after the slit design. Was it trial and error? Regional variation? Spiritual choice? Whatever the case, it worked. And what's wild is that these ancient visors don't just protect your eyes, they sharpen your vision. That's right. The narrow slit reduces the scatter of light, increasing depth perception and clarity. It's basic optics, but it feels like magic. You pull off your modern gloves and trace the slit with a bare finger. It's not perfect, but it'll do. A little rough around the edges, sure, but you made it. There's a strange pride in that. A quiet connection. In the distance, you see a figure moving across the horizon. Slow, deliberate. Another hunter, maybe, or someone heading to a fishing hole. You wonder if they're wearing sunglasses like yours. Probably. Maybe better. You stand up, bones creaking slightly, and pocket your creation. The wind has shifted again, softer now, almost like an exhale. You take a step forward and feel the bone visor on your face shift slightly, pressing cool against your temples. The thing is, these sunglasses aren't really sunglasses, not in the way you think of them. They don't block UV rays with layers of polarized film. They don't cost $200. They're older than fashion. But they do something even more impressive. They let you see clearly in a world that doesn't want you to. And as you walk across the blinding snow, the sky too bright to bear without them, you think maybe that's the best kind of invention. Not flashy, not loud, just right. The wind picks up again, not angry, just persistent, like a neighbor tapping gently on your window at 4 a.m., wanting to borrow a cup of something you don't have. You tighten your hood and tilt your face back into the visor, letting the slits frame the horizon. Time to move. A few minutes into your trek, the world feels less hostile than it did before. With the whalebone visor in place, the snow's glare retreats and the land stops screaming at your retinas. You've entered what some call the slit vision zone, where everything is still white. Yes, but calmer. Easier on the brain. You whistle, low and sharp. From behind the next snowbank, your team of sled dogs perks up, ears alert. They've been dozing loft, curled in a soft semicircle of tail and fur, waiting for you to be done playing around with bone. They rise in that boneless way dogs do, stretching without ever fully standing, and trot toward you, tails wagging like worn-out windshield wipers. You load your tools onto the sled. One of the dogs, a scruffy gray beast named Tulugak, nudges the goggles with his nose. You grin. No, not for you. You'd eat them. He sneezes in reply. Soon you're gliding across the snow, the runners whispering beneath you. The visor on your face slices the world into clean, manageable strips. Movement becomes easier to track. Shadows are more readable. You spot the tiny flutter of snow kicked up by a hair at an impressive distance, something you'd have missed with the naked eye, now dulled by sun reflection. This is where the slit design really shines. The Inuit didn't just wear these visors for comfort. They wore them to hunt, to travel, to see movement before it saw them. In a landscape with few vertical landmarks, no trees, no buildings, nothing but endless tundra, a flicker of motion becomes vital. A single misplaced shadow could mean the difference between catching dinner and going hungry. Historians still argue whether the shape of the slits, horizontal versus vertical, was optimized for light reduction or tracking movement. Some even suggest that the shape mimics the natural eye slits of Arctic animals like wolves and foxes, offering a kind of borrowed instinct. You lean into the sled's momentum, watching the dogs run. The sky is overcast now, not quite stormy, just flat and pale. The sun hides behind a thick quilt of clouds, and still the snow glows. That's the thing about Arctic light. It doesn't need direct sunlight to be intense. The whiteness comes from everywhere. Your sled hits a patch of firmer snow, and you jolt forward slightly. The dogs adjust seamlessly. You trust them. And you trust your eyes more now, too. It's a strange kind of intimacy. The way the visor trains your gaze teaches you to pay attention differently. Somewhere along the way, you start thinking about how something so simple could carry so much meaning. The visor is a tool, sure, but it's also a teacher. It teaches humility. You can't look everywhere at once. You're not omniscient. The visor reminds you to focus on what's in front of you, on what matters. You pass an old hunting trail marked with small flags, bright bits of cloth tied to seal ribs planted in the snow. They flutter like weak applause as you pass. Through your slitted view, they look ceremonial, distant, almost like prayer flags. And in a way, they are. You slow the sled to a stop and hop off. The dogs lie down immediately. Rest is not optional in the cold. It's sacred. You walk to one of the flags and brush off the snow around its base. There's a pile of supplies beneath. dried meat wrapped in skin, a few tools, even a folded map drawn on seal leather. A community cache, the Arctic version of a neighborhood pantry. If you're in need, you take. If you have extra, you leave. You blink, touched by the gesture, then immediately regret blinking without moving your visor. The sting of light is instant. You squint hard and slide the visor back into place. Back to comfort, back to sense. And yet, these visors weren't universal. Not every Arctic group made them the same way. Some coastal communities used driftwood, carving with seashell knives. Others preferred antler, lighter, more flexible. Some shaped their visors to curve tight across the bridge of the nose, while others left space for a fur lining underneath. The variety was endless, and so were the adaptations. One explorer noted a pair of visors made from flattened walrus tusk, polished so smooth they reflected the wearer's own face faintly. A mirror, of sorts. Or maybe just a happy accident. Historians still debate whether this reflective quality was intentional or simply a byproduct of good sanding. But either way, it adds another layer. Perhaps in the deep Arctic, where the land offers few moments of vanity, a small moment of self-seeing was more than just functional. It was personal. You return to the sled and glance at your dogs. Tulagak yawns. The others blink sleepily. You climb back on, adjust your grip, and mutter, "Let's go." The runners creak softly as you move forward again, carving long arcs across the white. And through it all, the whalebone visor holds steady. It doesn't talk, doesn't glow or beep, but it lets you see. And in a place like this, where sight can be swallowed whole by light itself, that is everything. You're still riding the sled, your hands tucked into your sleeves, your eyes steady behind the visor's narrow slits. The dogs are in their rhythm now, kicking up a light spray of powdery snow with each step. There's something almost meditative about it. The cadence, the cold, the muted landscape slipping past in shades of white and gray. You stop thinking in words and start thinking in shapes. Up ahead, the horizon wavers slightly. Not from heat, of course. This isn't the desert, but from refracted light bouncing off countless mirrored snowflakes. It's a strange phenomenon, this light. A kind of ghost sun hovers just above the real one, flickering faintly. You blink, then remember not to do that unshielded, and tug your visor snug again. It's a perfect time to think about why this land can be so brutal to the eyes. Snow blindness, also known as nyphoblesia or photokeratitis, is one of those old-timey afflictions that sounds like a medieval curse but remains absolutely modern. You'd think it only strikes on bluebird days when the sun shines off fresh snow, but no. Even on overcast afternoons like this, the light bouncing from snow and ice can cook your corneas like a pair of sunny-side-up eggs. And you wouldn't notice it right away. That's the worst part. The damage sneaks in, quiet as frostbite. It builds as the UV radiation scrapes across your eye, burning the surface layer. Hours later, the pain arrives, hot, gritty, unbearable. Your eyes swell, your vision goes foggy, and blinking becomes torture. You'll sit in an igloo for 2 days, whimpering in the dark while someone else guides your dogs. Now imagine that scenario without painkillers. No ice packs, no dark sunglasses, no soothing eye drops. Just darkness, snow, and regret. That's why Inuit communities developed the slit visor in the first place. It wasn't a fashion statement. It was medical gear. Historians still argue whether these visors were universally worn or saved only for travel and hunting. Some oral traditions suggest that young children and elders wore smaller versions, crafted to fit snugly around their cheeks and brows. Others claim they were used only for long hauls across open tundra, when the risk of snow blindness was highest. Either way, what's clear is that people here understood the danger long before science caught up. You pass a frozen inlet now, the ice cracked and glowing blue in spots like old glass. The dogs veer slightly left, navigating instinctively around a patch of thin crust. You lean with the sled, your visor framing each small hazard in that familiar narrow view. And here's the odd thing. You don't miss the full panorama. In fact, the narrowed field of vision starts to feel comforting, like blinders on a horse. You're not overwhelmed by stimuli. You're focused, intentional. Modern optometrists sometimes compare this to squinting on a bright day. By narrowing the entry point of light, the eyes relax, less strain, better clarity. It's essentially a prehistoric form of optical engineering. And it works. You pull the sled to a stop and decide to try something. You remove the visor, not for long, just enough to feel the difference. The glare slams into you like a flashbulb. Even through cloud cover, the reflected light is merciless. You wince and fumble the visor back on, blinking like a mole. And it makes you wonder, how did anyone not think of this earlier? Ancient Romans had glass, Egyptians had polished obsidian, but none of them invented slit visors. The Arctic did. Out of necessity. Out of genius. Back on the sled, you glance down at the visor again. It's not even fancy, just bone and sinew. A string of braided caribou tendon holds it in place behind your head. There's a small notch at the bridge, rubbed smooth from wear. You run your glove over it, thinking about the hands that carved it. The person who decided one day that sunlight bouncing off snow could be filtered. Not by covering the eyes completely, but by narrowing their view. Not blocked. Refined. And what's more, there's elegance in that decision. A restraint. This wasn't about hiding from the world. It was about making the world legible again. Inuit knowledge systems were built not on what could be controlled, but on what could be respected. You didn't battle the sun, you adjusted to it. You didn't conquer the snow, you listened to it. And you didn't avoid the glare, you slid it just enough to survive. You begin moving again. The wind is gentler now, more cooperative. The dogs are humming along, their breath rising in synchronized little clouds. You notice through the visor the way the snow looks textured now, almost like dunes. Light and shadow ripple across it in long, quiet waves. And you realize this visor doesn't just reduce light, it teaches you to see differently. The sled drifts to a natural stop near a bend in the landscape. Nothing dramatic, just a soft curve where the wind has shaped a low ridge. You step off and give the dogs a break, securing the runners with a lazy twist of rope and snow. They collapse into cozy heaps without protest. Smart animals. They've learned when the pauses come. You stretch your arms and take a seat on a packed snowbank. With your visor still in place, you let your gaze wander. The snow no longer blurs. The light doesn't stab. The landscape is surprisingly gentle. You start thinking about how different these visors could look depending on where you were. The slit sunglass concept wasn't a one-size-fits-all affair. It shifted, like everything else in the Arctic, based on resources and community aesthetics. Some groups in what's now northern Alaska preferred narrow, horizontal slits that stretched nearly temple to temple, offering a wide, cinematic frame. Others used short vertical cuts, more like keyholes, spaced carefully to allow peripheral awareness without overexposing the eyes. Some added a small third notch at the bridge. Symbolic? Structural? Historians still argue whether those additions had ritual significance or were simply early experiments in airflow and comfort. The materials varied too. Whalebone was favored near the coasts, abundant, durable, slightly flexible when treated right. But inland groups often turned to driftwood, or even the dense antlers of caribou, shaped with flint blades and smoothed with sand or dried moss. Walrus ivory was a prized alternative for those who could get it, polishable to a shine, light in the hand, and sturdy as anything nature had to offer. You imagine a table laid out with examples. Driftwood dyed with soot, antler carved with geometric patterns, bone burnished from years of use. Each pair a little work of art, not mass-produced, not factory-stamped. Made by hand, made with care. You pick up your own makeshift visor, the one you tried carving earlier, and study it. Still clumsy, yes, but you find yourself admiring the imperfections. The slightly uneven slits, the curve that wobbles just a bit too much. It's not a failure. It's a first step. Nearby, the dogs snore quietly. Tulugak twitches in his sleep, chasing dream rabbits. You grin. You're reminded of a passage you once heard from a visiting anthropologist. He wrote that Arctic technologies were elegantly sufficient, not overly complex, not primitive, just enough, no waste, no fuss. The slit visor embodies that perfectly, a tool so simple it borders on philosophical. And sometimes they were more than that. Some old specimens have etchings along the top or sides, little dots, whorls, and notches. Some of those symbols match tattoo patterns worn by women of the same community, suggesting a link between vision, identity, and adornment. Was the eyewear part of self-expression? Did certain marks mean something? Marital status, hunting ability, clan ties? Historians still argue whether those decorative flourishes carried meaning or were just the artist's signature, a touch of flair in a life that offered few luxuries. You try to imagine it, A winter gathering inside a communal igloo. People trading goods, telling stories, repairing tools. Someone pulls out a new visor, hands it around for admiration. Others nod, murmuring appreciatively at the fine grain of the antler, the evenness of the slit. Maybe someone laughs. Maybe someone makes a quiet joke about who's copying whose design this year. It's not hard to see the parallels. In your world, people show off sunglasses like status symbols, brands, styles, limited editions. In this world, style existed too, but style was married to survival. You couldn't flex a pair of goggles that didn't actually work. And still, you wonder, how many of those visors were passed down? Were they heirlooms? Or did each generation carve anew? Some researchers believe visors were often recarved from older pieces, bone softened and reshaped to fit new faces, new wearers. A kind of recycling that was practical but also perhaps emotional. You look down at your own face reflected faintly in the polished bone, just a ghost of a shape. You squint at yourself through the slit. Odd. Humbling. You're reduced to a pair of cautious eyes and a slow-moving breath. You put the visor back on, the string hugging your head just right. The wind rises again, playful now, not mean, and you rise with it, brushing the snow off your coat. One more look at the snowbank where you sat, one more glance at the sun, still diffused, still watching. Then you whistle the dogs back to life. They stretch, shake, yawn in chorus. And off you go again, sliding across this vast pale world, your eyes protected by something ancient, humble, and unexpectedly elegant. The sled carries you across a stretch of frozen plain so flat it feels like you're gliding over the surface of a frozen sea, only the occasional drift or crack to remind you there's solid land beneath all this white. The dogs are quiet. Even the wind hushes its voice, as if unwilling to interrupt the stillness. As the light shifts slightly, just a tilt, just a faint golden smear along the edge of the horizon, you begin to see the subtle sparkle of ice crystals in the air. And for a moment, the world feels both infinite and enclosed, a snow globe with no dome. You let the visor do what it was designed to do, guide your gaze without overwhelming you. The slits reduce the flood of light to neat ribbons, just enough to navigate by. And that's when you start noticing something else. Stars. Not many, not yet. But a few faint pinpricks above the blurred sun beginning to assert themselves in the dimming sky. Which brings you to an old question. How did the Inuit, wearing these visors, study the sky? Were the slits too narrow to stargaze? Did they remove them entirely at night? Well, it turns out they didn't always have to. Some visors were designed with slightly wider slits for twilight hours. Others had removable panels or were simply tilted upward slightly to let more of the sky in. And besides, twilight in the Arctic can last for hours, sometimes days. You don't switch from bright day to dark night in a blink. You ease into it, like slipping under a blanket. Historians still argue whether the visors played a role in early stargazing traditions, or whether people used other tools and techniques for celestial reading. But we know this. Inuit communities map their seasonal activities by the stars. And not just casually. The appearance of certain constellations marked the start of key migrations, both animal and human. Orion's belt, for example, might indicate the return of seals. The rising of the Pleiades, time to prep sleds. The movements of these stars were more than twinkling lights. They were calendars in motion. You tilt your head and peer up through the slits, testing how much you can see. It's surprisingly decent. The visor sharpens each star into a needlepoint dot, removing much of the haze. You wouldn't use it for fine astrology, maybe? But for general orientation? Absolutely. And you remember a story told by an elder in a sealskin parka, voice low and slow like syrup. He said his grandfather once used a snow visor as a kind of teaching tool, gathering children around a small fire, passing around the visor so each could look through it, pointing to the constellations one by one. Only look where the slit tells you, he'd say. Don't chase too many stars at once. A lesson about astronomy, maybe. Or maybe a lesson about focus. You chuckle softly, thinking how that advice still applies. The dogs slow to a trot as you crest a low hill. Beyond it, a frozen bay, iced over and shimmering in the low light. The water underneath is still moving, just faintly, just enough to crack the surface ice into elegant tessellations. The sight is breathtaking, but also dangerous. You steer clear of the thinnest patches. There's a soft amber glow up ahead, an oil lamp burning outside a snow shelter. A family camp, You ease the sled to a stop as figures emerge, bundled in furs, smiling under hoods. A pot steams over a stone hearth. You're offered a bowl of something warm, seal broth, most likely, maybe with a few shavings of frozen fish. As you sit and sip, visor pushed up on your forehead like a sleepy forehead crown, you strike up a slow conversation. Someone compliments your goggles. You nod, shyly. Practice pair, you say. They grin. One of the elders reaches into a small cloth pouch and pulls out a much older visor. This one made from ivory, the slits delicately edged with thin sinew. It's a masterpiece. He hands it to you without ceremony. My father's, he says simply. You hold it like an egg. You try it on. The world sharpens again. You feel oddly honored, oddly emotional. Not because it's rare, but because it worked then, and it still works now. You ask if the stars will be clear tonight. A younger voice, probably a grandson, nods. Clear enough to see the whale trail, he says. You raise an eyebrow. He points upward. That one long constellation, the one that looks like it's swimming west. You've never heard it called that before, but as you put the visor back on and look up again, you see it. A sweep of stars arching gently across the sky. And for a moment, with your eyes framed by bone and tradition, you feel like you're not just looking at the stars. You're gliding with them. The night deepens, but not the kind of night you might know from southern latitudes. Here, the darkness arrives gently, like a curtain lowered slowly with both hands. The stars emerge one by one, unhurried, as if they're waiting for their cue. Overhead, the sky pulses with quiet energy. You're seated by the campfire now, visor resting in your lap. The elder beside you speaks in a slow rhythmic tone, describing constellations you've never heard mapped in any textbook. He doesn't call them by Greek or Roman names, no Orion, no Ursa Major. Instead, you hear names like Taliktuk, Agnik, Nanook, the polar bear, the harpoon, the sleeping hunter. He lifts your visor and peers through it at the stars, nodding with approval. This helps, he says. Too many stars can confuse the eyes. Slits show you the right ones. You nod, not sure whether it's science or belief or both. Historians still argue whether snow goggles played a consistent role in star navigation or if that idea is more modern romanticism. But regardless, you can feel the logic. These slits cut the sky into neat ribbons, helping your gaze focus on one constellation at a time. The rest fades to soft blur. You think of it as a low-tech telescope, not magnifying the stars, but editing them. The dogs have curled into furry commas near the fire, their bodies rising and falling with each breath. Someone places a seal oil lamp between you and the elder, the flame steady and golden, protected by a curved piece of bone. Shadows ripple across your hands and the visor. It's here, in the middle of this circle, that the elder begins to tell a story. Not a bedtime story, exactly, but a tale that bends time. He speaks of a woman named Anna Aluk, born during the long winter in a village where the snow didn't melt for 9 months. She was known not just for her skill in skinning seal, but for making visors, goggles so precise and balanced they were said to help hunters track prey days before the prey arrived. Of course, that part's probably exaggerated. You smile politely. But then he describes her technique. How she would sing to the whalebone as she carved, humming a low tune believed to tell the slit where to go. She didn't measure. She didn't trace. She just felt. You watch the fire crackle as the story unwinds, imagining Anna Luke seated cross-legged in a snow house, lamp flickering, whittling away at a strip of bone until the shape revealed itself. The elder taps your knee gently. She never made the same pair twice, he says, but they all worked. You ask quietly if any of her visors still exist. He shrugs. The snow keeps what it wants. That line lingers in your head as you stand, visor in hand, and wander a little ways from the fire. The stars have deepened now, bright against a velvet black sky. You slide the goggles over your face and look up again. The constellations narrow into neat lines. And somehow it feels like Anna Luke is still watching through them. Like this isn't just a piece of carved bone. It's an artifact of presence, of knowledge, of watching the world as it is and learning how to see it better. You kneel in the snow and begin to draw in it with a gloved finger. A simple sketch, the shape of a visor, a line for each slit and stars above it. You're not an artist, but the gesture feels right. As you draw, a soft rustling behind you makes you turn. The elder has joined you, visor on his brow. He sees your drawing, nods once, then adds his own finger sketch, a small figure holding a sled line. It could be you, or Analuk, or both. You laugh quietly. He grins. The snow keeps what it wants, he says again. Then he stands, pats you on the shoulder, and walks back toward the flickering firelight. You remain kneeling in the snow a moment longer, visor snug, stars drifting through your vision like slow-burning embers. And it hits you. These visors don't just protect. They frame. They teach. They invite focus in a world that's too much. You wake slowly the next morning, curled beneath a layered heap of caribou furs and quilted sealskin wraps. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a single ember glow, barely enough to see by, but the cold hasn't crept in yet. Your breath fogs in front of your face, curling toward the low ceiling of packed snow. The smell of broth lingers faintly in the air. You stretch, hearing the soft crinkle of frozen fabric, and reach for the whalebone visor where it rests beside your bedding. The bone is cold, colder than snow somehow, but smooth, familiar. You fit it over your eyes almost instinctively, like slipping into slippers worn exactly to your shape. Outside, the day has returned in that pale sideways light that never quite becomes sunshine. The camp is stirring. Dogs yawning, kids in fur boots shuffling through snow, and a woman cracking thin ice sheets from the surface of a water hole with a practiced rhythmic chop. You take a seat on a snow bench and gaze through the slits at the rising land to the west, where the low hills catch light like folded paper. It's the sort of view that would blind you in seconds without the visor. With it, the glare is managed, sculpted, almost aesthetic. A young boy comes up beside you, his own visor comically oversized, clearly borrowed from an older sibling. He squints up at you. "Did you sleep with yours on?" he asks. You shake your head. "Almost." He nods sagely and adjusts the bone piece slipping sideways on his nose. "I think mine is upside down," he confides. You make a show of inspecting it and turn it around, gently. "There. You're a proper hunter now." He grins and runs off, arms flapping as if his new orientation has made him faster. You smile, and for a moment you consider the absurdity of the whole thing. Here you are, in a frozen expanse, communing with a 1,000-year-old invention that's never gone obsolete. That's not an exaggeration either. While many Arctic technologies have changed, synthetic sleds, GPS devices, even snowmobiles, traditional visors still exist. In fact, some Inuit carvers continue to make them using traditional tools, sometimes for museum exhibitions, sometimes for ceremonies, and occasionally just because someone asked for one. Historians still argue whether this continued production is a form of resistance to colonial narratives or simply a revival of heritage. But whatever the reason, the visor has endured. You walk slowly to the edge of the ridge and take in the landscape. Through the slits, the horizon is clearer, crisper. You're not overwhelmed by the whiteness. You're able to see, and it makes you think about how much knowledge is built into things we take for granted. You know now that this visor isn't just about light. It's about control, about simplicity. It doesn't block the world. It curates it. The elder from last night joins you with a slow nod. He holds his own visor, older than yours, its edges wrapped in narrow bands of caribou leather. He passes it to you for a closer look. You can see where the bone has been repaired. Once, twice. Small hairline cracks carefully bound with sinew and sealed with a resin-like mixture of fish oil and soot. You ask if it still works. He smiles. Better than anything from a store. Later that day, he takes you into a small dome of snow, a workspace, almost like a carving studio. It smells of smoke, oil, and something earthy. He shows you a collection of blanks, raw slabs of bone and driftwood, some scored with faint lines, others still unmarked. You sit together, carving side by side. He doesn't say much, just watches as you find your rhythm again, scraping slowly, shaping the arc. "Don't fight the grain," he murmurs once. "Let it tell you where to go." You think of Analuk, of her songs, of slits shaped by feel and flame. By mid-afternoon, you've made something that could pass for a visor. It's not pretty, but it's yours. You hold it up to your face, peer through. The world narrows but sharpens. Outside the carving hut, the snow continues its endless descent, fine as flour, catching in the folds of your hood and gloves. And once again, you're reminded, this land doesn't apologize. It doesn't negotiate. It blinds, freezes, bites, unless you meet it with equal measures of caution and cleverness. That's what the whalebone sunglasses were all along. Not luxury, not fashion, just a whisper of an edge, a way to survive beautifully. The next morning, the dogs are already awake before you. They yip softly, stretch, and nose at the snow near the sled, sending puffs of frost into the air with every exhale. You yawn, bundle up again, and tie the freshly carved visor to your belt with a short loop of sinew, the way you've seen others do. It still smells faintly of scorched bone and oil. Your plan today is simple. Travel east toward the coast, through a corridor of low hills and windswept flats where the snow curls into shapes like white calligraphy. There's talk of an old hunting outpost along the way, a collapsed snow house, half swallowed by time, with a story behind it. You ready the sled, whisper encouragement to Tulugak and his scruffy comrades, and set off. The wind is behind you for once, and you feel it like a silent push between the shoulder blades. The visor is on. The world again becomes manageable, tidy even. It's during this stretch that you start thinking about invention. Not just the moment a tool appears, but the quiet accumulation of ideas behind it. The visor wasn't born fully formed. It didn't arrive in the Arctic via divine brainstorm. It grew. One person likely noticed that squinting helped. Another carved bone to block light. Someone else tried different slit widths. Someone else still tested them in different snow conditions. And slowly, over generations, a simple piece of whale rib became a tool of survival. Historians still argue whether the idea spread across the Arctic by trade, migration, or multiple independent inventions. The designs vary so widely, some with elaborate flares over the cheeks, others barely more than a strip across the brow. But they all function with uncanny similarity. That suggests not imitation, but convergence, a shared logic responding to a shared challenge. Your sled slices across a stretch of ice so smooth you can hear the whisper of the runners. The sky is a sheet of pale jade, backlit by sun hiding behind cloud, and everything feels both intimate and enormous. You pause at the top of a ridge to check your bearings. The visor helps you spot the faint line of dark rock that runs across the next valley, the edge of a glacial moraine. That's where the old shelter is supposed to be. You head down, dogs pulling gently, and you find it sooner than expected. A low mound of snow, half collapsed, with a ring of scattered whale bones protruding like the ribs of some enormous sleeping creature. You approach slowly. No danger here, just memory. You walk the perimeter, brush snow from the entrance tunnel, and step into the hollow space inside. It's cramped and dark. The ceiling has caved in at one edge, revealing a patch of sky above. But in the corner, half buried beneath a drift, you spot something, a shape. You kneel, careful not to disturb the delicate powder, and uncover it. A visor. Cracked, warped by years of freeze and thaw, but unmistakably handmade. Whalebone, thin and graceful, with slits carved cleanly through. Your breath catches a little. You hold it in your gloved hands, brushing gently along its curve. One side has chipped away, but the other still shows signs of wear. A faint polish from countless fingers, a subtle bend from a specific face. It once fit someone. It once kept someone from going blind. You sit for a while in the ruins, visor in your lap, listening to the wind whistle softly over the snow house. You imagine the person who made this, who wore this, what they saw, how they moved through a world as brilliant and brutal as this one. You try it on. The crack doesn't interfere with the vision, not much. You see the landscape again. That same thin slice of snow and sky, sharpened. It's not nostalgia you feel, it's continuity. You're not reviving something lost. You're part of something that never ended. Later, you wrap the broken visor carefully and strap it to your sled, beside the one you made yourself. They look oddly similar now. The dogs stir. You stand, you whistle. They surge forward, eager, and you guide them toward the moraine, visor still resting on your nose, the world once again in narrow focus. And you realize something unexpected. Limiting your view hasn't made you see less. It's made you notice more. The visor doesn't blind. It edits. It sculpts the chaos of ice and light into lines you can follow. The snow has begun to fall again, not heavily, just a gentle sift from the clouds, like flour through a sieve. It drifts sideways on the wind, coating the sled runners in a soft layer as you glide forward. Your visor filters the flakes into a silent cascade of motion. Through its slits, even a snowfall becomes something to read. You're far from any camp now, and it's deliciously quiet. The kind of quiet you only get in a world padded with snow and untouched by engines or phone signals. Just the dogs, your breath, and the swish of sled runners. You tap the side of your visor once, almost absent-mindedly. You're starting to forget it's even there, which, in some ways, is the greatest compliment you can give a piece of gear. The snow begins to thicken as you approach a coastal bluff, a rise of frozen earth and sea ice where hunters once stood with harpoons, watching for movement in the water below. You stop the sled and climb the ridge on foot, visor still on, your boots crunching gently. The dogs lie down behind you, grateful for the break. You reach the top and crouch there, peering over the edge. It's all frozen now, but you can feel the sea beneath it. Waiting, breathing. And here, nestled in the wind-carved edge of the bluff, you see something curious. A small cairn of stones, balanced deliberately, almost artistically, beneath an overhang of ice. Inside it, another visor. This one's made of driftwood, much older than the others, crude even, but still clearly shaped with care. You lift it gently and inspect the slits. They're uneven, slightly angled. One is barely more than a scratch. And yet, it would work. You can tell. Historians still argue whether visors like these were ever left deliberately as markers, or if this is just a lost tool, forgotten and weathered into legend. But you like the idea that it was placed here on purpose, as a sign, or maybe a gift. You try it on, and it's different, yes, but still comforting. The view narrows. The sea ice below looks like a cracked mirror. The horizon is all line and curve and meaning. You think about how visors like these weren't always worn by adults. Some were made for children, not toys, but training tools. Lightweight and loose, designed to be outgrown. It wasn't just about preventing snow blindness. It was about learning to see the land properly from a young age. That was the Inuit way. Not to hide children from the elements, but to give them the tools to meet the world on its terms. Back in the present, you return to your sled, the driftwood visor still in hand. You place it beside the bone one you found earlier. You're starting a collection now, unofficial, uncurated, but deeply personal. You make camp at the base of the bluff, carving a windbreak into a shallow snowdrift, lighting a small oil lamp inside the igloo-like shelter you build from ice blocks and packed snow. It's not fancy, but it holds. Inside, the firelight flickers on the visors, which you've hung from pegs of sharpened driftwood along the wall. They cast strange, thin shadows, each slit letting a tiny blade of orange glow fall across the white interior. It's oddly poetic, each visor framing its own bit of warmth. You sit with a cup of broth, knees pulled to your chest, and just watch them. You think about how modern goggles fog, how they crack, how their straps snap, and how these old visors, they don't fog, they don't pinch, they don't break unless you're reckless. They just work. You don't need infrared coatings or shatterproof polycarbonate. You need a good eye, a steady hand, and the wisdom to know that more isn't always better. Sometimes less light is more vision. Outside, the dogs shift and sigh in their sleep. The snow hisses gently against the walls. Inside, your breath fogs in the orange lamplight. And on the far wall, the slitted shadows move slowly across the ice, like sundials made of history. You wake before dawn, if you can even call it that. This time of year, the sun never truly rises, just smears a faint light across the horizon like a brushstroke someone forgot to finish. Still, there's a softness to the air that tells you the night is passing. You stretch, bones cracking softly, and pull on your boots with fingers still sleepy. The shelter has held. The dogs are restless, eager to move again. You take your time, repacking your supplies, tucking the visors carefully into your kit like relics. They don't clatter like metal. They don't creak like plastic. They rest with the weight of story, light but not trivial. You slip on your own visor, the one you carved, and feel it settle against your brow. It no longer feels like an accessory, it feels like a habit. A second set of eyelids, built from whalebone and guesswork. The journey today takes you along a sea trail used for generations, though it's not marked with signs or fences, just a series of ridges, cracks, and memory. The dogs find their rhythm again, moving over sea ice so flat it reflects the sky like glass. And that's when you see it. Not far ahead, a cluster of low wooden frames emerges from the whiteness, partially buried in snow, curved like ribs from a long-dead leviathan. An old hunting camp, long abandoned. You stop the sled and approach slowly, visor narrowing your focus, letting you pick out the edges from the glare. You step into the frame of what was once a shelter and notice more than just bones and driftwood. There are carvings etched into one of the central beams. They're faint, worn by wind and salt, but still legible. A series of small notches in pairs, 4 in a row, then a space, then 3 more. Not letters, not art. Measurements, probably slit-width tests for visors, a carver's notes. Historians still argue whether such camps were also workshops, places where visors and other survival gear were made and exchanged. Some oral histories say yes, that skilled carvers would bring extra pieces to camps like these, offering them to those whose visors had cracked or been lost. Others believe these markings were personal, left behind like signatures. You kneel and run a gloved hand along the beam. It's not just a ruin. It's a laboratory. A whisper of innovation in a place where error meant blindness, and blindness meant death. You walk the perimeter of the camp and find more fragments. Splinters of whalebone, a loop of dried sinew, the frame of a visor so decayed it crumbles in your palm. And yet, even in decay, it speaks. You take out your own visor and compare. The slit width matches one of the carved marks. A pleasant jolt runs through you. Whoever worked here centuries ago used the same measurements. You whistle low, almost reverently. This land has always been editing itself, you think, sculpting knowledge in bone and snow. Back on the sled, visor fitted snug, you glide eastward again, the ruins fading behind you like smoke. You start thinking of what these visors meant in a spiritual sense, not just tools, but thresholds. To wear one was to shift your perception, to see not everything, but only what mattered. There's a story, half remembered from a museum label or a journal article, about a hunter who claimed that his visor helped him see animals in the storm. Not literally, of course. But by cutting out distractions, the slits allowed him to spot movement others missed. A twitch of fur, a ripple of snow, a blink against the wind. He believed the visor sharpened his inner vision too, kept him from chasing illusions. It's not so different from how monks wear hoods to narrow their focus, or how artists frame a canvas before they paint, or how you, right now, stare out through bone-shaped shadows and find clarity in a landscape that would overwhelm anyone else. And it makes you wonder, what else in life would feel less confusing if it came with a visor? If you could simply filter out the noise, the sled glides across the final stretch of sea ice as night rolls back in, slow and blue. You stop once more to make camp, this time beside a driftwood post carved with a faint spiral. Another marker, another mystery. Inside your snow shelter, you hang your visors again, you light your lamp, you watch the shadows, and you think, maybe these weren't just for the eyes, maybe they were for the mind. The next day, the cold has deepened, not angrily, just decisively. It's the kind of cold that speaks in creaks and silences, that holds its breath and waits to see if you'll keep moving. Of course you do. There's nowhere else to go. You harness the dogs with numb fingers, brush the frost from your coat, and tug the visor down once more. The bone is colder now, but it still rests gently against your brow. A familiar pressure, like a guide saying, "This way." Eyes forward. Today you're cutting inland, away from the sea, and into a land of jagged snow ridges and frozen riverbeds, a place once dotted with winter encampments. A quieter world. No vast open ice, just folds and corners and pockets of wind. And it's in these folds that new stories surface. You pass a place known in some oral histories as Chimmervik, the place of dog dreams. It's said that sled dogs who died in their sleep would find their way here, tails wagging in a slow circle, chasing phantom hares across the sky. There's a stone marker nearby. You don't know if it's a real tomb or just a symbolic one, but either way, you pause. One of your dogs, Tulugak, sniffs it and then lies down beside it without being told. Maybe he knows. You rest for a while there, visor pulled up. Your eyes adjust slowly to the full, painful glare of the snow. It hurts, even briefly. You wince, blinking furiously. Then you put the visor back on. Immediate relief. It's easy to forget how essential this thing is until you remove it, like blinking into a camera flash, like walking into a mirror of light. Historians still argue whether this extreme contrast, visor on, visor off, was something people used deliberately, perhaps to heighten awareness or reset the eyes. Some claim elders would tell younger hunters to take the visor off briefly when they began to falter, to remind them of why they needed to focus again. You imagine a grandmother saying, "Go on then, take it off. See how clever you feel squinting like a walrus." There's another story that returns to you now. One about a young girl who wandered too far during a snowstorm. She had no visor, no hood, just bare eyes and panic. She saw shapes in the storm, dancing lights, voices, shadows that didn't belong to animals. When she was found days later, barely alive, she spoke only in whispers and never walked without a visor again. Whether the tale is cautionary or symbolic, no one's sure, but the meaning lingers. In the Arctic, seeing too much can be as dangerous as seeing too little. As the dogs rest, you pull out your collection of visors. 3 now, the one you carved, the bone relic from the snow shelter, and the driftwood frame from the cairn. You line them up side by side, like old friends. Each tells its own version of the same story. Each holds a piece of the Arctic in its slits. The one you made is slightly crooked. Honest, the ancient bone one still smells faintly of smoke, like it remembers fire. The driftwood piece, it hums of salt and sea spray, even after all these years. You wrap them again and stow them carefully. The sky shifts from blue-gray to pearl. The dogs stir. Time to move. You glide on into a terrain that seems stitched together from wind patterns and snowdrifts. Trees become sparse, rocks poke up like broken teeth, and then, unexpectedly, you pass a group of travelers headed the other way. Modern sledders with neon jackets and carbon fiber gear. Their dogs wear lightweight booties. Their goggles gleam like bug eyes. One of them waves, you wave back. She glances at your face, squints, then calls out, "Is that a bone visor?" You nod. She laughs, half in surprise, half in admiration. Hardcore. You just smile and pull it a little tighter, not for effect, just because it fits. And as you ride on, you think, hardcore? Maybe, but also soft-eyed, focused, carved, like the land itself, shaped not by force but by wind and time. Later that afternoon, you reach a stretch of tundra known for its silence. Not just quiet silence. It's as if the land here swallows sound before it reaches your ears. The dogs run lighter, even their panting feels muted, and your sled glides over packed snow so smooth it almost hums. You don't realize how long you've been watching the horizon through your visor until you pause to drink and remove it briefly. The glare hits you instantly, just a flash, and you're back to squinting, shielding your eyes like you haven't done in days. You chuckle to yourself. Lesson learned. Again. You sit down, let the dogs rest, and take out the visors. One by one, you lay them across your knees and examine the differences. Yours, simple and humble. The bone one, precise and aged. The driftwood one, a little warped but still telling stories. Then from your coat, you take out a small strip of antler you've been keeping, a future blank. As the wind brushes around you in a soft spiral, you pull out your bone knife and start shaping. Slowly. No rush, just shaving one edge. Not because you need another visor, but because now you know, the making is part of the journey. Historians still argue whether snow goggles were considered personal items, things tied to an individual the way you'd tie a name to a coat. Some evidence suggests visors were shared freely, handed down, passed around. Others say no, that the slits were carved to fit a specific face and light sensitivity. You look down at the antler in your lap. If you finish this one, you're not sure if you'll keep it. Maybe you'll leave it somewhere, in a cairn, in a shelter, on a driftwood pole, for someone else, like those who left theirs for you. The thought feels right. The sun, such as it is, hangs low and buttery near the horizon now. The shadows grow longer. You slide your own visor back on and stand up slowly, dusting the snow off your knees. Ahead lies a narrow valley between 2 hills, the entrance marked by an oddly shaped snowbank that looks, you swear, like the tail of a giant sleeping fox. The visor frames it perfectly. You guide the dogs through, their paws crunching rhythmically. The path winds into a white corridor, flanked by walls of snow-sculpted rock. And in this hushed canyon of wind and ice, something changes. Your eyes no longer fight for focus. They follow the lines naturally, as if the visor has taught them a better way to see, not just through snow, but through everything. The narrowness sharpens your attention. A drift becomes a map, a shadow, a signal. The smallest shift in texture across the trail reads like handwriting. And you begin to realize, with a strange kind of peace, that the visor doesn't just cut light, it curates the world. It tells your mind, this is what matters. Let the rest go. As you emerge from the valley, the world opens up again, but you don't remove the visor. You don't want to. You're used to this version of reality now, the tidy, trimmed-down view. It's not that you see less. It's that you've stopped trying to see everything. You camp that night under a natural rock overhang beside a cluster of wind-smoothed boulders. You build a fire in a hollow and hang the visors again from short pegs. Their shadows flicker across the stone, three distinct silhouettes, all variations of the same ancient idea. You sit quietly beside them and whisper, "Thank you." Not sure who you're thanking. Maybe Anna Look. Maybe the driftwood cairn maker. Maybe your own hands. And for once, you don't feel the need to figure it all out. You just let the shadows flicker. Let the visor sit. Let the story keep unfolding. You wake slowly to the creak of ice shifting somewhere beneath the earth. Not loudly, just a subtle groan in the deep, as if the land is stretching beneath its quilt of snow. The fire has gone out. The dogs are still asleep, legs twitching as they dream. You stay tucked under your blankets for a while, visor resting on your chest like a cat who came in from the cold. Outside, the sky has taken on that surreal Arctic palette again, peach, violet, and ash gray, all at once. You stare at it through the visor's narrow slits, and it looks like a painting trimmed into focus. Today will be your final day on this journey. You've already decided. Not because you're tired, or because the land has pushed back, but because you've gathered what you came to find, even if you didn't know what that was at first. You pack slowly. The rhythm of it feels ceremonial now. You wrap each visor in a different cloth, layering them like offerings. Then you tuck them carefully into the sled bag, bone, driftwood, and your own, a trinity of sight. As the dogs begin to stir, you kneel in the snow and carve a small notch into a nearby boulder with your bone knife. Just a symbol, two diagonal lines joined at the middle. It means safe passage in an old dialect you read about once. Or maybe it means something else entirely. That's okay. You're not carving for archaeologists. You set out again, visor in place, the light slanting low and golden. Every drift, every glint, every ripple in the snow is sharper now. You don't even think about it anymore. The visor has trained your eyes, your brain, your body. You've internalized it. As the sled glides forward, you pass an ancient hunting site, a row of collapsed meat caches, their stone walls barely taller than the snow around them. You pause for a moment, dismount, and walk over. There, between two stones, sits something. You brush off the snow. It's another visor. This one is different again, carved from caribou antler, narrow and delicate, with inlaid bits of dark stone around the slits. Decorative? Functional? You try it on. The world looks beautiful through it. A little darker. A little calmer. You place it back exactly where you found it. Some things aren't meant to be taken. You look out across the snow one more time. Your eyes, used to the visor now, have learned to anticipate its framing even when it's off. You squint slightly out of habit, even without the slits. You laugh to yourself. The visor isn't just an object anymore. It's a mindset. Historians still argue whether Inuit visors should be classified as technology or art. But in your bones, you know that's a false divide. They were both. They still are. Each slit was carved by someone who understood that too much light is just as dangerous as too little, that clarity often lies in limitation, that survival is less about brute force and more about knowing what not to look at. As the wind rises and the dogs pick up speed, you let go of thoughts. Let your mind blur with the land. Let the slits guide your vision. You're not trying to reach a destination anymore. You're just part of the trail. You ride on, and now the snow thickens again, slow and soft, folding over your tracks behind you like a blanket being drawn up to the chin of the land. The sled slows, the snow hushes. Even the dogs move in near silence now, their paws brushing the ground like whispers. You ease back into the furs, visor still nestled in your lap, and close your eyes not tightly, just enough to let the rest of the world dim. Your breath settles. Your fingers stop twitching from the cold. The land is still out there, endless, but it no longer feels harsh. The visor, simple and elegant, rests nearby. You imagine its smooth edge, its grain, the way the slits narrow your focus, not to imprison you, but to remind you, not everything must be seen all at once. Your journey through snow and memory begins to blur. The visors you found, the ones you made, the stories whispered across centuries, they all layer gently now, like snowfall on snowfall, details softening into warmth. You imagine Anna Luke again humming to her carving as she shaped her last piece, the firelight on her cheek, the glint of a new slit catching the glow. You picture the stars above the camp, peeking through slits in the visor like the night watching you back. You imagine hanging your visor one last time, on a peg, in a shelter, for someone else to find someday. And you imagine them smiling, slipping it on, and seeing the world the way you have. The wind softens, the shadows lengthen, and your breath grows even. Sleep comes now, slow and steady. You don't fight it. You welcome it like snow falling across the Arctic, gentle and absolute. Good night. Sweet dreams.